now when you're living in such a like a fast-paced world with the internet and everything, people want something authentic, so they find vintage, and I feel like even that's become like a trend in itself, right? People, "Oh, I just wanna buy that because 'cause it's got character," or whatever.
Yo, this is Reg Ferguson, Fashion Geek number one. How are you? Welcome to the ride. Thank you so much for listening. I'm a men's fashion consultant here in New York City, and I help the everyday man go from fashion confused to fashion confident. If you ever found yourself staring at the closet, not knowing what to wear, or if the idea of shopping for clothes makes you feel physically ill, then this is the show for you. My goal with every episode is to help make looking good feel easy. If you ever want my help, email me at reg@nyfashiongeek.com for a consultation. If you have a friend who's looking to level up his fashion style wardrobe game, please share an episode with them. While you're at it, if you dig the show and haven't already left us a rating and review, please consider doing so now. Your shares, ratings, and reviews help us grow the show and help us get the best possible guests and help more men dress their best. Today, we're going to talk with Ethan Wong, who is in Los Angeles. We're going to talk about something the everyday man should have an interest in. Why should we be interested in vintage clothing? Ethan, back in the building. This is your second time. You're my first return guest.
I'm very, very honored to be that person for you, Reg.
Hey, man, I'm very glad to have you at that maiden voyage. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know when you'll be hearing and seeing this, but it is the day after Thanksgiving, aka Black Friday. And Ethan, since he's in Pacific, he's 3 hours behind. I'm just so flattered that he woke up to make this happen. So thank you, Ethan.
Of course, I mean, the food coma, it didn't stop my alarm, which is good, so I was able to be here on time, you know? There was a lot of good food. I went to my girlfriend's, family one, so I actually this is the first time I've ever done, like, 2 Thanksgivings in one day, basically, so I was completely tapped out. So much food, just I mean, I even napped during the day. There like, my girlfriend even took a video of me holding, like a barbecue stick that,
Yes,
you
I
can
saw
have,
that.
yeah, and I'm
Yeah, I
just
was
like,
like, wow, that's concentration, Holmes.
yeah, I'm surprised, yeah, I've never, like I don't think I've ever held anything, like, in my hand, like, sleeping before. I'm pretty surprised, if I ever had to, like, defend myself, if I'm, like,
You
camping and there's bears
yeah.
around, I know I'll be prepared a little bit, you know? Snap attacks.
If you literally were on a line for some crazy drop, you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Ah, ah, no, me first. Get in that suit now.
There we go. I was, prepared for Black Friday, but no, my Black Friday, days are, like, kinda behind me now. I feel like once you get into, like, menswear, you're not really, lining up, I guess, at, like, the mall anymore, right? Like, that's not really, like, a thing that happens, um, for, like, the tailoring side anymore, you know?
No, no. I mean, I grew up. It's funny. Every Black Friday, I can think of relatives who are gone and my aunt who's still here because we just always looked askance at that. Like, who goes hours on a line
Yeah.
for some alleged deal? And like you said, now let's make it more germane to you and I. Yeah, like Brooks isn't saying, hey, come on, guys. Brooks Brothers is going to open here at Madison Avenue at 5 o'clock. Let's go. Like
Yeah.
it's just virtually unheard of. And in the case of me, since I've got some years on you, there is nothing that I need, bro. My wardrobe is truly complete. My clothes have clothes. So someone would have to knock on my door and give me an offer. Like it's
I mean,
just
yeah, now that with video you can see behind me, like, there's clothes that have clothes behind me,
yeah, you got
so
some gear up in there.
that's right, that's right. I mean, it's a lot of it is vintage. A lot of it I've had for a long time, and some of it is like, you know, improvements, like, I might have thrifted something before, but then I get like a better quality version or just something that matches more of my current aesthetic. So there's not been too many changes, but it's always been big. So that's kind of I'm the same way. I don't really need to they would have to pay me to shop there. I don't really need anything.
Right.
So
Yeah, for me now it's a color. I don't have that in this color.
Oh, there you go.
That's yeah.
That's the real
That's
temptation. It's like, "Oh, I have it in, like, brown check, but what about the gray check?" You know? It's ugh.
Hey, to me, that's
Mm.
how again, that's how you all of a sudden it's the breadth of the wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly.
But you hit on something.
Mhm.
So I think it's a good starting point for us. You said, I mean, I could argue the same thing, but again, we're being very specific today about vintage. You said that sometimes you'll make a purchase on an item and then you'll upgrade said item. So the real immediate question is, because this is your expertise, right? I'm not a big vintage guy. It's not that I don't have vintage pieces. And unfortunately, I lived a long enough life now that stuff that's contemporary for me is vintage.
It's
And when
vintage,
someone
yeah.
says that, I'll beat their ass. So they're like, how that's a vintage. Shut up. So anyway, why why should a person get into vintage? Let's just hit that
Ooh,
foundational question.
yeah, I mean, vintage to me is always more interesting than modern stuff. I think a lot of people have different reasons for getting into vintage. I think right now we get a lot of talk about like authenticity or like patina, right? Like people want clothes that
Uh,
have character, right?
if I hear that
And
word again, I'm gonna kill somebody. Live
I mean,
life and you'll have patina, ladies
yeah.
and
See,
gentlemen.
so there is that aspect of it, which I think now when when you're living in such a like a fast-paced world with the internet, everything, people want something authentic, so they find vintage, and I feel like even that's become like a trend in itself, right? People, oh, I just want to buy that because it's got character or whatever. It goes like, no offense to those guys, but like it gets crazier when like guys are buying basically like destroyed pair of jeans over like regular ones.
Yeah, which
Like
I hate that as well.
that's kind of weird to me. But what I can't excuse, or I guess the thing that I actually like about vintage is that there's usually details, whether it's in construction or the fit or just like extra stuff like, pleats a certain way or whatever, that make vintage much more interesting than a contemporary item. And that's kind of what started my whole journey, like recognizing that, certain shirts, certain jackets, certain pants just had something different. And the only way, at least at the time when I started, was to get it through vintage. And now, if you like those details, you can probably find it. There's a lot of brands now that are doing great things, or that there's like repro brands. But if you don't have like the money, to get like a Mr. Freedom workwear jacket, you can try and hunt for the maybe not the original one, but like vintage versions of it. And that's also one reason why I like it, because it's also usually affordable, again, depending on your taste. So that's like the overarching thing for me. It's about those details.
Well, you hit on something. So, and also I like to shout out a brand that I see occasionally on the gram and I like what they're doing. I know you know them, Scott Fraser Collection.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, that seems to be the real deal from the times
Mhm.
I've looked at his post.
They look great.
Do you deem vintage purchases as economical? I mean, are there certain places out in
Hmm.
Los Angeles in which they go, "Hey, we know what we have and we're going to hit you."
Oh, I mean, there's definitely those places in LA. I think the part of me that kind of respects them is that I can't imagine where they find some of that stuff that they sell. Like,
Right.
well, like I think in New York or whatever, like when I see like an OCBD and I'm like, okay, that's kind of expensive for an Oxford shirt. Again, if it's like a really, really old Brooks one that's from like the 40s, I'm like, yeah, sure, I get that. But in general, in LA, it's usually stuff that like I probably could not find on my own from those stores. Like if I'm looking like those like French workwear or European military stuff that, you know, these guys had probably had to go out to like Europe to go find. Sure, like that
Mm,
stuff is pretty expensive. But I guess that's where it usually stays in LA, because in LA you don't really have too much tailoring, So that stuff is either just not sold, so we don't get ripped off at the vintage stores for it, because you can still kind of find vintage tailoring, that might have been better before, but now it's probably in the hands of costumers,
mm.
So it's a little bit hard to find it, and some places still might charge you a little bit more for it, um, but it's It really depends on what you're looking for, and I still think eBay or Etsy still kind of blows everything out of the water, unless you're, like, going out and, like, finding it yourself, like, you're, doing trips to, like, middle of nowhere towns and, like, you know, California, just, like, in, like, the middle of California, and you go to, like, some thrift store where, a guy had suits for, like, 50 years and, he passed away and he sold it, like, unless you're doing that, like, eBay and Etsy are still probably the best places to find stuff.
So, yeah, I wanna kinda be comparative.
Mhm.
So, when you're going online,
Yeah.
does the same rule apply in terms of, economically, on average, you're finding good deals? And also, I'd like you, if you don't mind, I know it's a two-parter, forgive me.
Mhm.
If you could kinda do a breakdown for the audience and just tell me like, "Hey, common price for a pant, for,
Oh, yeah.
a OCBD, you know, for a sport jacket, for a suit, for a fedora." I mean, I'm
Yeah,
I'm really
yeah.
curious.
So, yeah, when I was looking, maybe 2 to 5 years ago, I think, like, most shirts were, like, less than $40, like,
Mm,
just in general. Again, it depends on the taste, right? Like, and brand names as well. Like, before, I would look up just like, just vintage OCBD, like, on like, just blanket search on eBay, and I would just look, and, of course, when it's that vague, you're gonna get really cheap prices because people probably don't know what they have. People trying to just let stuff go. But, of course, if you're trying to go, like, Brooks Brothers, Makers, OCBD, you want that, like, you wanna find, like, the '80s, '90s label. What's the more stuff you put on it, obviously, the more curated it's gonna get, and the chances of someone knowing what they have and knowing how much that is worth other people will get higher. But even then, back then, it was like, less than $100. Suits,
mm.
I found Southwick suits between, like, 100 to $200, sometimes even cheaper. I remember a guy was, like, happened to be selling 3 suits, 3 Southwick Brooks Brothers suits for, like, $25 each. Pretty crazy.
Whoa!
And 60s, they just, like, 3 roll 2, kind of like a thinner, like, not too thin, but, like, kind of like a medium lapel, swelled edges. One of them was 3-piece. I messaged him way back in the day, and I'm like, "Hey, like, that's my size. Can I buy all 3?" He's like, "Here, you can have it for, like, $50 instead of, like, 75." So, it was pretty
Wow.
crazy. But, like, I mean, I'm sure that stuff still happens, I just don't as you can see behind me, I have so many clothes, I don't really hunt as much anymore. But
Right.
those kind of prices, like a fedora for, like, 100, depending on the condition of it, ties for less than 40, stuff like that has kind of, like, spoiled me for today, I didn't expect, right, with TikTok and vintage becoming so popular, and all as well as kind of my taste in clothing or elements of it kind of becoming popular again, like the big pants, pleats, and everything, that has also kind of made vintage prices go up. Um but yeah, like, try and stick pretty economically conservative or frugal with, like, my prices, and even now when I'm looking for this stuff, I try and set those barriers, I try and, if it has, like, a best offer option, I'll cap it out. I'll be like, "Okay, here we go," or I'll bid, and if it goes higher than that, I'm like, "Well, maybe I'll find it again someday," you know? So, I
Right.
try and do that. Again, I don't have to do that, if I was a guy who was trying to build a wardrobe from scratch, maybe I would have to pay those prices. But nowadays, it's kind of like, well, maybe I didn't need that OCBD anymore,
Right.
So, it's all additive at this point.
Right.
But yeah, those prices are kind of what I do, and especially if I'm going to, flea markets or whatever, I try and use those in my head, I'm like, "Okay, I pick up a shirt, I know that the max I would pay is $80. I'd go, and I try and haggle with the guy, and if not, I'll walk away with it, and I think, sometimes you still get success. I still encourage people to go out to flea markets because, you never know what you're gonna find. Like, I've still found, like, OCBDs at flea markets in LA where I'm surprised because 'cause I'm like, well, typically the flea market's full of, like, workwear denim or, like, '90s tees, and sometimes you'll find, a nice button-down collar shirt or a dress shirt, and you'll be like, "Oh, well, maybe they'll give it to me for cheap because people don't really wear or buy that in LA, and so it still works out too." But yeah.
And for the audience, OCBD, open collar button down,
Yeah.
because sometimes we could get caught up in jargon and we don't know who else is listening. So, so how many stores in the LA or surrounding LA area could an individual find items? Like, is it like 2 stores, 5 stores? You're a big city, I'm a big city.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna expand to, like, the greater Los Angeles County, which
Yes,
has,
yeah,
like,
do
the
that
eight
because
like,
I have no idea.
the 50 it's crazy how big LA is, 'cause well, LA as a city is probably normal, but, like, LA is a county, so, like, it incorporates, like, 50 cities. Well, I mean, for me, I always like going to, like, the local Goodwills. Like, if I'm in an area
Mm.
and I'm bored, if I'm, waiting for coffee or waiting for someone else, I'll, like, try and hit up, like, a local Goodwill and kinda see what they have there, and usually, again, if we just think about, like, things in terms of, like, what a regular guy might have worn, like, you might find, like, yeah, Brooks Brothers shirts or just, no label, or defunct label Oxford, cloth button-down collar shirts, and wool pleated pants. I keep telling people are always like, "Oh, I can't find anything." I'm like, "Dude, there's so many pleated trousers at flea markets or sorry,
Really?
at Goodwills." Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, if you wanted, like, everyone's buying, like, the Docker straight leg work pants or, like, the Carhartts or whatever, but if you just find, like, pleated chinos, that are kinda similar to, like, the Ralph Lauren Andrew cotton pants, like, there's so much of them at even at my local Goodwill, that's, like, 5 minutes from where I live, there's always so much of them. I mean, I don't need pleated chinos at this point because I already have some, but if people needed them, like, they're already there, or just, like, sometimes I find, like, yeah, like, vintage being, like, 80s, 90s, or early 2000s Brooks Brothers pants that are pleated, gabardine, whatever, like, they're there because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, that's probably what, like, an old dude would have kept wearing," and, and they're fine, like, they're usually in great condition. Sometimes, maybe, like, there's some moth holes or, like, they've been pressed too much, there's, like, the wool is burnt, but there's usually, like, some kind of, like, pleated trouser, I feel like not not that you shouldn't, support small business, but, like, if you wanted to start out, you could probably find a pair of charcoal gray pleated trousers at your local Goodwill, and
Mm.
I'm sure there's a bunch of sizes, because people pass on their clothes at multiple stages of their life, you can probably find one in your size and all you do is hem it. If you like my style where, like, you wanna keep those big pants, all I do is just hem the trouser, get a cuff there, and that's it. Maybe adjust the waist, but, like, you know and even if you wanted to, like, get it more tailored or whatever, like, back in the day, I would thrift pants and I would then it doesn't matter how big they are, you would just go to my tailor and I would taper it down, get it hemmed, and there you go. You didn't have to go to, get some custom made trousers. So
Mm.
that was, like, my MO for a long time, but, like, yeah, you can still find that kinda stuff. But if we're talking, like, specific vintage stores, um, there's, like, 3 or 4, like, ones that focus, like, a lot on, like, the workwear and Milsurp stuff. Obviously, if you're in the LA area, like, I'm talking, like, downtown, Arts District, or even, like, West LA, it's gonna be more curated, the people up there are charging a premium because, the people who are buying it are probably other designers, there's other well-to-do people who just aren't, like, the ones searching for stuff. So if you don't wanna do that, you can find those places, like, I mean, I think Western Gifts in Highland Park is one of the best ones. He does a lot of European workwear, which I think I can't even find, and even
Mm.
on eBay, you don't really find that either. So he's got some really great stuff and some handfuls of, like, tailoring and everything. There used to be a place I loved. I think they're still on IG now because they closed during the pandemic. But Paper Moon Vintage was always one of my favorite ones. They specialize in, like, 1920s to 1960s clothing, and
Mm.
their men's selection was always really, really good. A lot of my early suits that I passed on because I think we talked about before, it's just too hot to wear in LA. I don't know how the
I
vintage
was
guys do it.
I wasn't
Yeah.
gonna bring that up, but since you have.
Yeah, I mean, all of those, like, double-breasted, like, they were great, they're just so heavy, and I think I've just gotten sensitive skin over the years. It just makes me feel uncomfortable now. But yeah, they would sell to a lot of the swing dancers, to other costumers, and just
Mm.
regular guys, and that place is really good. I think, again, they just sell online now. Um and, uh, and yeah, there's a couple places like in Long Beach as well. But I do wanna shout out my absolute favorite vintage store, Joyride Vintage in Orange County. If anyone follows me, you'll know that I'm usually hanging out there like once a month, and I post those ones. I post stuff from of the guys who work there and just the store in general. I love the curation there, and they're I mean, again, this isn't like cheap stuff. We're not like thrifting, but they're relatively affordable vintage, and they have some great stuff. Again, like whenever time I go there, I try on whatever they've just got in, and it's a great spot. But that's one really great place. Um, But again, if you wanna try and hunt, then you just go to Goodwills, you go to the flea markets, Rose Bowl is the 2nd Sunday,
Oh,
Long Beach.
I want to talk about that
Oh,
because
yeah, yeah, we can, yeah.
yeah, I've read about that, and I know you went. I believe you went recently. Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanna carve out, a spot on the pod for us to talk about this thing because it just sounds fascinating from a New York perspective. Like, what? Like,
Yeah.
what is this?
It's really an amazing place. I mean, so for those of you who don't know the Rose Bowl is like this little stadium in Pasadena. They use it for college games and concerts, but every 2nd Sunday of the month, they do this really big, flea market. I don't know exactly if it's, like, the biggest flea market because I think that there's Alameda and, like, the Bay Area. I don't know the sizes, but it's pretty big, and it is people, like, drive out, like, I'm not saying, like, within LA, I'm talking people have I've seen people, like, come down from the Bay Area just for, like, the couple hours of, of picking, and then they drive home, that's crazy. Maybe
Yeah.
they get an Airbnb in the evening, maybe I might be
No,
exaggerating,
but I
but
get what you're saying, far
yeah,
and
yeah,
wide.
exactly, yeah, and even the sellers, like, I see a lot of, Japanese sellers, they come in, they sell stuff there, there's also Japanese buyers. I mean, California also has a lot of has a Japanese population, so I'm also not surprised there, but, I mean, like, the amount of stuff you get there is just so amazing, and I think again with the pandemic and again with TikTok and the whole vintage craze kind of coming back in various eras, that like it's only gotten bigger. I remember one time during the pandemic when, of course, you had to have like capacity stuff for a lot
Oh,
of like
sure.
events. I remember I got there half an hour before my friends. I got in, they couldn't. Like they capped it, and it was only like it goes from 6 till 3. Of course, the premium pricing for early bird is 6 till 9, and then from 9 till close, it's the regular price. I got there, yeah, shortly after 9 o'clock, and they got there like at maybe 10, half the capacity.
Whoa.
Yeah, but I mean, nowadays they don't have that anymore,
Right, 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 right.
thankfully. But I remember that one, it was so disappointing for them because like they drove out
Yeah.
and then they were like, well, can't do anything now. But
Uh,
yeah, it's amazing. There's if you want furniture, they've got plenty of people who do furniture. There's a couple of like craft people, like kind of like local craftsmen who probably make mid-century styled furniture and blankets and everything. But there is just so much, like every I mean, most of the booths kinda look the same, right? They have, like, a section for, like, vintage watches, they have, like, jewelry, like, Navajo Western jewelry, they got costume jewelry for women. Um, there's, like, usually people who have, like, racks of vintage '90s T-shirts that are expensive as hell, you know? And, of course, you got, like, the workwear guys and everything, and then, of course, you've got, like, just piles of clothes on the ground, and sometimes those are like, "Oh, everything's a dollar, everything's, $1 to $5, or it's the people who like it's still a pile, but you gotta take it to them and go, "How much is this?" And then they eyeball it and they tell you, you know? So you've got all of that happening.
and this is all in the Rose Bowl parking lot, correct?
The parking lot, yeah, it's not in the stadium, it's just all
Right.
literally, like, around it, like, it's, like, in, like, a horseshoe shape.
Around it.
There's just yeah, around the Rose Bowl itself,
No,
yeah,
right, right,
in,
right,
like, a
right, right.
U. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whoa. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's no empty slots. Is that correct? I mean, is that
Yeah.
how this
Yeah, I
is?
mean
It's just so extensive?
Yeah, I mean, especially during the early fall, like right now, before it gets to what, California, LA people call
Yeah.
cold, right? Yeah. I got you. But like that it's that's like the time where people like the most people show up to sell and the most people come up to buy because it's like the perfect weather to be outside, doing this, right? Like
Right.
the sun is out and it might be like 60 degrees, but you're still sweating walking around,
Sure.
going from place to place. And I think it gets probably the most sparse, when it's like the rainy season, like in April to like June area. And then of course when it's like July and August when it's just like 100 degrees, like people aren't really out. But of course, you might find better deals because people, don't want to be there that long. So there was a time where I would go like every month, and then that's how you see all that stuff behind me. Um,
Really?
yeah, I mean, not all of it, but like a lot of my casual items came directly from the Rose Bowl. Again, you're not gonna find guys selling like Ivy League sack suits or OCBDs. You might find them, if like if you pick it up from the rack, and some people just might have it, but most of it is like, t-shirts, sweatshirts, yeah, knitwear, um, casual jackets, leather jackets, and especially a lot of Milsurp and workwear. And that's
Mm.
where I kind of built almost all like, every time you see me wear workwear and Milsurp, like it's probably I got it from the Rose Bowl flea market or one of the other flea markets that are in LA. And so if that's what people like, then you gotta get out there, and grab it, It's just it's there.
I've been to LA. I remember reading about the Rose Bowl, I don't know when, just I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, and it just seemed fascinating. I've been to LA once, so I couldn't incorporate it because, like you said,
Yeah.
the timing is very specific.
Yeah.
It sounds like it is virtually impossible to go through every vendor in one day. Would that be correct?
I would definitely say so if it's, like, one of your first times, Like, if you're unable to well, let's put it this way, if you want to experience each booth, then, yeah, you can't do all
Right,
of it in one day,
right. Which I
I mean,
figured.
the yeah, but there are sections to it, like, so, again, like, it's a U shape, and, like I said, there's a lot of people who sell, like, furniture, so, like, if you want to specifically go to clothes, obviously, there are clothes people spread out throughout the horseshoe, but there is one specific section that is, like, just clothing vendors.
Oh,
Um, and it's across, like, I call it across the bridge, it's called if you look at a map, it's called, like, the white section, like, that's just, like, how they zone it out.
right.
And that's where, like, yeah, like, all of the clothing people are. And so you could spend a whole day in that section as well.
Mm,
Um but, if you go in there with, like, a game plan, like, "Okay, well, like, I want to walk out of here with, you know, OG 107 fatigues, I wanna come out of here with a specific type of, band T-shirt or rap T-shirt or whatever." Like, you could probably hit specific because, you'll see it. You can be like, "Okay, well, that guy is selling Milsurp. Okay, I don't need Milsurp right now, so I can avoid that booth," So you can the more you go there, the more honed in you are. So, like, now I'm only there for, like, maybe, like, 2 hours. I don't really need
really?
furniture as much. I mean, I have my desk and everything. So I don't at this point, I don't really need furniture, but if I did, I could probably go there and focus on that rather than the clothes. Probably would be more interesting, and a new experience for me at this point.
Since you live out there and and this is your thing, are
Mhm.
there a lot of vendors you now know when you go there, or is it still hit or miss? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like, I do love meeting people, but I feel like when I'm in that mode, I'm kind of, like, just in the zone, and,
Mm,
there are a couple of vendors that I do know, outside of it. I probably met them at other vintage events. There is this thing called Inspiration LA. I think they did one in New York once, but that was kind of like a military or Milsurp workwear leather jacket kind of thing, like the kind of the vintage that most people kind of think about, when they think of like, vintage style with like the fatigues and everything. It used to be like a kind of like a convention or like a trade show for people who made
mm,
that kind of stuff. And so I would meet the people at those events because, like, some of them would sell to other designers who happened to be there, so I would, like, you'd meet them, they would also sell at that event. Um, so there are some people I do know, um, and it's fun to catch up with them, sometimes they'll give you a deal on something if they have something that you like recently, I picked up, like, these 1940s sunglasses, which might have not have been a great purchase because I feel like they're gonna fall apart,
I said,
it's
they're
one of
gonna
those
fall.
things.
I was the
Yeah,
first thing I was thinking, I'm like, I don't know, bro.
yeah,
Sunglasses.
yeah, I mean, if they're, I feel like, they're probably like some novelty one, but, like, I really wanted them and they're really cool, and I guess it's one of those things where if I bought, like, the expensive version, I guess I test drove the originals and, like, okay, now I know I like the shape, and so I can, like, use that. I get that aspect of it, but yeah, he gave me a deal on those, and then, it's fun to see that, but most of the time, like, I mean, nowadays, I feel like there's just new sellers each time. I met a new seller the last time I was there, this past one that you referenced, and normally I don't talk too much, obviously I'm just kind of there to try on stuff, and it's also early in the morning. I don't eat breakfast when I go there, so it's like
What?
I go there from like yeah, I mean I know 9 is not too early, but like I wake up, quick shower, get there, like go 9, end at like 11 or 12, and like you're pretty, it can be you can get cranky if you're not eating anything, and of course I could bring something. I don't think about it, I just leave. And so, but this past time I was there with I ran into a friend and we would kind of walk around together and he was in a chatty mood and we talked to this new guy and he's like yeah I just moved here and he's like he's been a vintage seller and it was really cool to meet people like that and he did like gifts deal. I ended up buying like just a shirt from him and it was a little beat up, but nothing that that I or my tailor can't fix. And so sometimes that, yeah, that stuff kind of happens, which is really great. But otherwise, I mean, they're really friendly, even if you don't become like friends with them or follow them on Instagram, because these people, at least the ones that I've talked to just briefly, like they really love selling clothing and they're very knowledgeable, and it does make you appreciate what they have to sell. Um, and so, I mean, most of my haggling is always done with the people who just have, like, who don't know what they have, and they just kinda throw out a number, then you just kind of, when it's like those piles of clothes, you just pull out, you find a great thing, and you're like, "How much is this?" And they go, "Okay, like $50." Like, "Well, can you do, like, $30?" And then when you don't know them, it's easier to do that, So,
Right.
that's the best part, but yeah, it's if you go by yourself and, there's a chance you can make some friends out there, and at least some contacts. And if you ever feel like you want to DM them, I know some sellers don't like that. If you go like, hey, if you find this, let me know. Like, they don't do commission stuff, or and some of them do. So it's good to like meet people to kind of find that if that's how you want to find your clothes.
Right. Now, and I know you love New York.
Yeah,
And really, how this second episode came, meaning your return, is we saw each other at a Rolling Blazers party,
that's right.
right? So we met IRL.
Yeah,
So I recognized you immediately. You seem to recognize me immediately.
yeah.
So the point is, I know you love coming to New York. I know you hate our weather. My point is, you're a Los Angeles native. You come visit New York. How do you feel? And I think the listeners would be curious. How do you feel the New York City vintage store game compares to LA? What do you like about our offerings?
I mean, number one, you guys have just more tailoring, I think. Obviously, right? Like you think East Coast in general, you have more of a reason to wear tailored clothing, by which I mean obviously sport coats, button-up shirts that are meant to be worn with a tie, chinos, except chinos that are not military chinos, and of course, like leather dress shoes. Like that's just something that the East Coast in general just seems to have a lot of, and in New York, with the amount of people who are there, who pass through, and who live there, I feel like you find that stuff a lot more. And I think that that's really the best part about, for me at least, when I get to visit New York and kind of look around there. You get, of course, all of the great modern contemporary stories, but then when you go to a thrift store or just even a curated vintage store, you find like, yeah, Brooks Brothers, or even modern like contemporary menswear brands. Like I saw an Anglo-Italian suit at this secondhand store. It didn't fit me. It seemed to be made for a much smaller guy. But like that would never happen in LA. Like, you don't really find, yeah, like the Armory or whatever, in a secondhand store in Los Angeles. Or even, I can't even think of like Sid Mashburn, I think is like a contemporary brand. And I've never found that at a Goodwill or whatever here. So like the fact that exists in New York is pretty crazy. And I'm not surprised that a lot of that kind of tailoring kind of survives in New York, whether you work in menswear or not, because of just how much you can find of cool garments like that. Um, and so, like, going to I forgot what it was called. I feel so bad because I when I was last there, a friend of mine who basically buys designer secondhand stuff, he was
Mm,
curious what I thought, so he took me to his spots too. And there was one place again that had like Yohji Yamamoto stuff, but also again that Anglo Italian suit. So again, seeing those two things together in a secondhand store was so like that was mind blowing to me.
mm,
Um, and then of course going to like Williamsburg in Brooklyn and seeing the stuff that they have there, in terms of tailoring and OCBDs is just fascinating. Um, and yeah, I like that. I like seeing it. But of course, it's a little bit pricier than I would want to do because I'm used to the eBay and Etsy stuff of it.
right.
And sometimes it is like right on the mark where it's like, okay, well, it is what I would expect to pay for it, and then there are some times where I'm like, "Well, that's just too much," you know? But it is great to physically see and handle it, again, because at the flea markets here, like, you're not gonna really find much in the way of tailoring. Most ties are probably gonna be stained, whereas in New York, if you find a secondhand tie, it's probably in still pretty good condition, you know? Um, but yeah, I always love hopefully being able to go out to those secondhand stores, whether it's curated or not, in New York, and just seeing what I can find. I think the last time I was there, I kind of bought some like 1930s ties, um, and I know it's pretty small, but again, there's already a lot of 1930s ties behind me, so I only needed the color I did not have, So,
What's your favorite vintage store in New York City? Putting you on the
ooh,
spot.
okay, yeah, yeah, okay. So one of, I think Church Street
Yep,
Surplus, I think is what it's called.
yep.
That's where I got those vintage ties from. He has some great
Oh,
ties over there. And it doesn't have to be 30s or not. I think I was looking at some of the 90s ties, and of course, once you get past some of the crazier yuppie ties, there's some good stuff there. I don't really discriminate with like eras on ties as long as the material isn't like fully polyester, obviously, or if it's of course, the pattern is just tasteful in my opinion. But yeah, that's where I bought the ties. I can't speak too much to the actual vintage like military stuff. Of course, it might rival what we find in LA anyway. But I mean, I think like the first time I went, which is like 5 years ago, they had some like Gurkha pants that I had never seen in person before. So that was pretty cool to see. Um, I mean, that's a good spot. And then I don't think anyone is. I think some people might be upset with me for saying this, but I think that 10 Foot Single by Stella Dallas in Williamsburg is a great spot as well. I remember the first time I went there, my friend said, "Don't tell anybody about the spot." But then it's like, I mean, I think I started seeing it on TikTok, and I feel like that let me have the freedom to share it at
yeah.
that point. But I like that place a lot. So when I went there, that kind of reminded me the most of like an LA vintage spot, just because of like this the mixture. They had some leather jackets, they had some tailoring. Obviously, not like they have some like full suits there, but it wasn't like the like in LA you get a lot of like the swing dancer stuff, which is
Mhm.
it's meant for that kind of crowd. Whereas I feel like in New York, like, some cool hipster artsy guy could probably buy like a vintage 40s suit and kind of wear it in a different way as opposed to here where there's like a dedicated like rockabilly swing scene. And that's not to say that there's some cool vintage scenes in New York as well. But I feel like the vibe is a little bit different. But anyway, at 10 Foot Single, what I like buying there is like the preppy stuff or the kind of ivy trad stuff. Because obviously there's no spear point collars, but they like last time I was there, I bought like Brooks Brothers OCVDs. And it's not super cheap, but it is the same price as like what I would get on eBay, between like $30 to $60 depending on the era of Brooks Brothers it's from. So I'm like, "Oh shit, like, well, that's great." And I can actually try it on. It can fit my neck. I don't have to like buy something like, "Oh, Mel, the seller messed up on this one. I gotta give it to a friend or return it." Um, I also bought like a pair of like Madras 2 pairs of Madras pants there, which crazy. Like, like the kind of like not I know Madras isn't like go to hell, but like, the kind of like fun, bold, preppy stuff that you find there is really cool versus in LA, you might find like Lacoste polo, something more basic that like an LA preppy person would maybe wear. Like you don't have like the fun East Coast, like Wasp, Hamptons in like the summertime kind of a thing, which I found there at still at 10 Foot Single. I feel like if you go there looking for like, oh, I want a place to find like immaculate three-piece Savile Row suits, if they happen to have it, sure. But like I don't really have too much expectations, and I'm always there finding like just regular stuff like ties, pants, um, and shirts. And every time I go there, I find those things. And so I really recommend going out to that place because it's just really cool, and it's priced affordably, if not what you'd expect at a reasonable price. Those are the main 2 spots I feel like, when I went to New York, I always love visiting.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're the best. So moving on. So for a person who's interested in vintage, doesn't know much about it,
Yeah.
do you feel what is the response when you're wearing an item, an ensemble, which you know is vintage sourced?
You know, I think before the pandemic, I think people were relatively nice. I mean, I call it like menswear trauma. Like it's like it's fake. It's not real. Like of like like why are you so dressed up? It's not a real dig. People wanted to be meaner, they probably could. Um, but I didn't get too much of that. I think also just because 'cause I've been doing it for such a long time, people might get that vibe from me in general. But nowadays, I think people do like, they can recognize it as, like, vintage now because I think, of how popular it's kinda coming back. Um, and they probably recognize how much modern designers are referencing vintage, like, we see, like, Gucci is, like, doing '70s stuff, right? Like, I think and so if you dress in that way, people they won't say that you're dressing Gucci, but they can probably recognize, "Oh, that's, like, a specific look," versus, like, just looking dressed up, which I think is really cool. People can discern taste, which I always felt people could. They just needed, like, the vocabulary or the reference point to kind of, use. Um, but yeah, I mean, most of the time nowadays, now that I've, like, gotten vintage or gotten tailoring that kind of mimics vintage in terms of silhouette, I get it more, I think, when I'm wearing, like, vintage, like, casual pieces, especially, like, if you wear, like, wide leg jeans with, like, white socks and, like, a casual jacket that's kinda cropped, you look like a some kinda greaser or some kind of, like, a background character in some, like, '50s movie or something, right? And I feel like some people do recognize that as well. But it's also because I intentionally like those casual looks and those specific, aesthetics. So, of course, I'm intentionally doing that, and so people, getting that response from people who can recognize it is like a positive in my book. Um but yeah, or even if it's like a tie, people can be like, "Oh wow, look, like is that a vintage tie?" I'm like, "Yeah, it is a vintage tie," because they don't really make them like this anymore. The designs don't look like this. You don't have like those big square motifs and those abstract patterns, and so it is cool to get those comments every once in a while, and especially if you can educate if they ask, like, what makes it vintage, like, "Oh, well, I'm glad you asked," and then, I can show them not just the pattern, but, you take out the tie, and look how thin it is, like, the interlining is thin, it's got, like, a hand-rolled edge, or it's untipped, and you can say, "Okay, look, it's shorter because back then pants were higher, so obviously the ties were shorter," just if people are willing to learn, I'm glad to, like, kind of talk about them until they tell me to shut up, you know? And the same goes for, like, jackets too, like, "Oh, look at, like, the lapel," and everything like that.
Do you feel, as a broad generalization, that the items that you have sourced and acquired are better quality than contemporary items?
That's a good question. I think yes, when we're comparing it to, like, the mall. I think that that's kind of the idea here. I mean, it's because back then, I mean, like, not everyone was buying, like a hand done Savile. I mean, Savile Row still existed back then, and that was still like a high regard, a mark of quality. But like if we think about like department store suits, or even Brooks Brothers stuff, um, I personally feel like that it feels better quality, or just there's just like this heft to vintage. Obviously, like the looms weren't made to spin as thin as they are today, right? So you don't really have like those super 120s, ultra fine kind of garments. So back then it just if like a hardiness is a metric of quality, and it is for some people, I think that with vintage you absolutely get that. But if we're comparing like apples to apples here, like if you think about like garments back then that were made for department stores, that were made like mass produced to be like as if it was like the mall, I think that, yeah, vintage is a higher quality,
Mm,
than those things, you can't like, I'm famously not into the J. Crew Ludlow suit, just because of aesthetics, um, but when you feel like, again, why people buy, like, vintage Brooks Brothers, like, you just compare the 2, it just feels better.
mm,
And, of course, when you introduce things like, okay, well, like, if you think about, like, a Ludlow suit that has a name brand, like, cloth in it, of course, that's gonna be harder because, like, those name brand cloth or those fabric mills are probably made in, like, a specific way that does have a lot of quality. So, like, that starts to get harder to compare to, but, like, for, like, a run of the mill, let's just say, like, a J.C. Penney suit versus, like, I don't know, a Hartschaffner Marx suit from, like, the '30s, like, you compare those 2, the Hartschaffner Marks is just gonna be way better. And
mm,
there's plenty of, like, no-name mills that I'm sure if you look up, like, with some local factory that made suits, those are probably just, spun and made way better than, yeah, again, like, JCPenney, Macy's, Joss Bank, etcetera. Southwick is a good example of, like, just a big factory that made suits for a long time,
mm,
in America, and if you find, like, a Southwick made vintage suit, the chances are you're probably getting a really good quality garment. So if people are, building wardrobes in that way and they can find those things, whether it's at a vintage store, flea market, or at on eBay, like that's a good place to look at, looking at those labels.
What? Because I know, again, game recognized game. You have a significant wardrobe, so it's going to be a tough ass question for you.
I'm ready.
It's intentional. I know you're ready. What is the best, whether it was online or in store, Rose Bowl, what have you? What was your best acquisition? Whatever
Ooh.
best means for you. What was your best vintage acquisition?
Oh, man. I have like a couple of them if you don't mind me sharing
All right,
some
yeah,
of the
do it.
stories because
Do it.
there's different metrics. I remember one time I was at Dapper Day, which is like this, this kind of fun, it's like a
Yes.
fun dress up event. It's not serious. It's just meant for people to come, go to not just Disneyland. They have other stuff too, but they're mainly known for their Disneyland events. But they have like an expo space where they have like live jazz music. It's a really fun time, and they have vintage sellers there as well. And I remember going there and I saw this flex suit, and I was like, "Oh, what is this?" And it said like 1950s flex suit, like $75. Like, first off, that's crazy. You shouldn't sell that for that little because it's a pretty, even if 1950s, with its like big shoulders, the very Ricky Ricardo look. I'm not a huge fan of that aesthetic, but I'm like, "Whoa, okay, that's interesting." Like, it's so cheap. I pull it out and I'm like, "That's not 50s." I'm looking at it. It's 3 roll 2 soft shoulders. It's got pleated trousers, and I look at the label. It's Kamoshida United Arrows, which is like a Japanese brand, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Oh,
yeah, yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
$75." And again, like, Kamoshida, it's not cheap, I also know it's not bespoke or anything, but it's like, it's a pretty
It's
well-known
high end.
Japanese brand if
Yeah.
you know it, yeah. And it's like wool silk linen, super soft, and I'm like, "Wow." The issue was I couldn't try it on, so at the place, this is not during the pandemic, this is years ago. I think this is before they started bringing, like, those, like, little tents people can actually try on clothing,
Mm.
otherwise, some sellers probably wouldn't let you take it to the bathroom, understandable. Um, but yeah, I bought it and it was great, and it was one of my favorite suits for a long time. It was just, again, this really lightweight green suit that I kind of
Mm.
made up. I think if people follow me, they'll know I have a green cotton suit that's kind of like, in my head, it's kind of like replacing that one. Again, I got rid of it because it was just way too, the pants were a little bit more tapered than I'd wear, and I got bigger over the years, so I just
Mhm.
I and I guess the previous owner, I'm assuming maybe it was like a guy who bought it in Japan or something, like he had let it out as much as possible already. So I had like, 2 years of wearing it, and I gave it to a friend of mine who was smaller than me. But that I'll always remember that one. That one was that's pretty crazy. Um, I already mentioned the 3 Southwick suits for like
Yeah.
75 or $50, something like that. That was pretty awesome. Um, but like, yeah, recently, there was a time, I mean, this is probably not special now, but to me it is. I was at my local Goodwill, and I think I just decided to go back because I hadn't gone thrifting in a long time. I took a break again, like I said, I took a break from going to the Rose Bowl because I could not. I don't want to keep spending money. You gotta buy a ticket. You're paying money to go spend money. So I took a break from all of that, and I focused a lot. People know me, like I bought like a lot of good shoes over the past years. I focused on the kind of upgrading and kind of just getting like my custom suits that I really liked, and honing my fit. And I took a break from buying, and so I was like, okay, maybe I'll go to my local Goodwill and we'll just see what happens there. And I went in and I found some trousers, and I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's my local Goodwill, but they don't let you try on things. Again, it might be a COVID
Mm.
thing. They close the fitting rooms, and maybe it's also because maybe they're short staffed. So maybe they don't want people to steal things, so which also I
Right.
guess makes sense with the pandemic. Um, but I found 2 pairs of pants, and they were, one of them was this, like, copper brown, it felt like rayon. I think it's probably polyester, but it felt nice, and, like, it felt like rayon, like the gabardine feeling, and it was really good. So I was like, I don't mind this, and, it doesn't feel like the rough, dry
Right,
polyester
right,
that
right.
people think of, right? So there was that, and then there were these pants that feel like, not like, they're kind of like crepey, like there's like a little bit of a shine to them, like, or like a fleck, but not really. It's just kind of like how shimmering or iridescent the fabric is and like light. It was like an 80s pair of trousers. They were like in this charcoal gray. I thought they were polyester. It had the 100% wool tag in it. I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. I bought both of them, and I tried them on. I'm like, "Well, I hope I don't have to return these $10 pants," you know, because at Goodwill right now, it's not returning, you have to exchange it. I'm like, "Well, I don't know
Oh,
what they're gonna have," and they fit perfectly. Like, they just no tailoring necessary. One of them was side tab in the trouser, and one of them was, just a regular belt loops, and I was so happy with them, and I love them. I wear them a lot. I wore the black or the charcoal gray ones on my birthday. I've worn those brown, rayon-ish trousers, a lot, and they're really great, and I didn't even have them. I did nothing to them. They fit right off the rack, and that has been one of my favorite things, and so it's proof to me. I'm like, "Man, if you want pants, you can find that. You can still find that stuff." They're double pleated, and each one was like, yeah, less than $15. So can't beat that. That's been my favorite thing that happened. And that was only like, yeah, if my birthday was in July, that was only like half a year ago or a little less than half a year ago. So yeah.
what was the worst vintage acquisition, either in store or online, Ethan?
Oh man, I remember going to this. I'm not gonna name the store, but it's a very expensive vintage store, and I kind of thought we were there to hang out, and I kind of felt like, okay, maybe he does expect me to buy something here, and I did. I found something that I really liked, and I have bought vintage Brooks Brothers on eBay before for, like, less than $100. I still have one of them. It's a gray plaid, tweed jacket, one of my favorites. It has, like, the 346, and it's from the '60s. It's a literal '60s sack jacket. I got it for less than $100.
Hmm.
I picked out this, like, brown tweed jacket, and, he was like, "Well, normally it'd be $400, but I can give it to you for, like, 250 or I think he did 3, then he said 250. And I'm like, "Wow, that's a lot of money." And this is before when I was working retail at the time.
Hmm.
And so I didn't even have, like, a full-time, the corporate job that I have now, and so it was a pretty big deal. I'm like, I and I was the only one in the store because it was I thought we were just hanging out, like, I was checking
Ah!
out his spot, and so I was like, "Oh, yeah," like, and I was thinking about it, and I felt this looks a little bit of pressure in those kind of situations, but and I did buy it, and it is one of my favorite jackets. I look forward to wearing it every time it's, fall, winter. Again, it sucks that it is such a seasonal garment. It is a pretty, it's not the spongy tweed like my gray plaid. It is one of the kind of heavier, not super scratchy, but it definitely has more of a rough texture. Um, but I do wear it a lot. I still do. 5 years later, it's still one of my favorite jackets. But it was a lot more than I was expecting. And this comes from someone who has bought like I guess ring jacket was never that cheap, but like ring jacket was only like a couple $100 more, and ring jacket for retail is like $1,200, right? And so, you know, I guess maybe that kind of unlocked my threshold for other things, but it was a little bit surprising to me again. So like worst is maybe a strong word to use, but definitely was like I did not expect to spend that much on a garment. Um,
That's fair.
yeah. Other than that, I think everything else has been pretty good. I mean, I found not I mean, again, I hope this wasn't like me bragging, but, like, I found, like, vintage '50s trench coats for, like, $40, but, like, I didn't really find it. The guy offered it to me at that price. I didn't really do any work.
He just threw it on me. Well, what was I supposed to do?
Yeah, and it was honestly that story is really funny because I went to it was at Joyride, again, one of my favorite vintage
Mm.
shops. I've been going there for years. They knew me before the blog even existed. I was just some kid who made the trek out to Orange County, and, when I got there, and I don't know why I didn't expect this, but it was pouring rain. Like, it was just
Mm.
one of those random LA days that just we actually got some real weather, and he happened to be selling trench coats, and he's all like, no one else but you and your friends are gonna buy this because no one really, even though they sell a lot of tailoring, the guys who walk in are probably gonna buy a suit for, like, a wedding or something. They're not gonna buy, like, the whole look, right? And so it's like, "Can you just buy these dang tren" and it's also raining, like, you're gonna need this anyway, so I'm like, "Fine." So me and my friend Spencer both bought vintage '50s trench coats for $50, or I think even less than that, and it was really good for a while. Um, I had to give that to a friend because the belt was like it was small. It was really interesting, like where the garment itself was like big because of course back then like really big stuff. But I guess maybe it was meant to be belted like really small, so like you would get a really big chest. But yeah, the belt was shorter than I had wanted to, and over the years as I get bigger, I just there wasn't
Yeah.
enough to actually tie it, and so I gave it to a friend, at this point, I was able to kind of get like a more practical. I got like a Uniqlo like waterproof one.
Mm,
And I don't think they make it anymore, but it feels like a 60s one. And I got like an oversized fit so it can fit over my tailoring. And that actually is a bit more practical. And there's no belt; it's more of like a Balmacan, so it just has
mm.
buttons on it. But that one was again a really good day, and that one did that trench coat served me well for a number of years. But yeah, I'm looking back. I mean, I can't really think of anything else that was like too bad. I can think of stuff where when I buy it, I feel regret because I mean over time because it's just not that cold in LA, and
I
it's
know, Ethan.
yeah, everyone listening should know that it's just, it's a warm place. I mean, even yesterday for Thanksgiving, it was like 76 degrees, which was
Oh,
very warm.
ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I was
Thanksgiving?
trying to yeah,
Ugh.
I was trying to, break out the cords, have that nice fall attire,
No,
and you
no,
just can't.
please,
Yeah.
please don't pass out at the dining room table, Ethan.
Yeah, not because of food, just because of heat stroke,
Right, right, exactly. I feel
uh
I'm trapped. The heat. Ah.
Just keel over. No, I think, there's a couple times I bought like, nice wool gabardine shirts, camp collar shirts, Pendleton, stuff like that. And you do it because you like the pattern, you like the details,
Yeah,
but
Pendleton
then
is
you
dope.
just
I have one.
yeah. But then you just don't wear it. Especially for me, wool shirts are always a regret for me because I'd rather have a wool jacket because you have like an extra shirt to like kind of protect you from feeling all the rough stuff on your skin. But when it's a shirt, obviously it's directly on you, and I get irritated, so I couldn't do that. But looking behind me, I see I have this naval pea coat from probably like the 60s or so. Really heavy Melton wool, big dramatic color. I love it,
Mm.
but it is a challenge when I get to wear it because it's just when you have
Too
your tweeds,
heavy for
it's
where
too
you
heavy.
live. Don't
Yeah.
freaking wear it. You're a goof.
Or when it is cold enough, what do I do? Do I pick between the pea coat or do I wear the tweed jackets with the sweater vest and the turtlenecks? And so it's like, and you can't put all those together. So I have to decide, and my heart lies with the tailoring, and so the casual garments end up kind of staying on the rack. But I am challenging myself this year to be a little bit more casual in the fall winter, and not get too excited for my tweed jackets, and to break out that pea coat, once in a while, just so it gets that wear.
California confusion.
Hey,
All
that's
right,
it. That's
Ethan.
exactly it.
I want you to answer these questions that I've posed to you before, but in the realm of what we're talking about,
Okay.
vintage clothing. So, why is fashion important?
It's important because it is the ultimate hobby where you get to show off your personal taste, and when it's I can't even think of a better way than for vintage and wearing vintage to kinda show that off. All the details, um, all of the expression. That's why it's important because you get to show it. That's why it's so cool.
Okay. In the same realm, what difference has fashion made in your life?
Oh, man. I guess in regards to vintage, makes me it it makes me embrace being specific. I think that's been one of the
Mm.
best things, biggest impacts in my life, to kind of be like, okay, well, if it's important, I should focus on this stuff, um, and applying that kind of taste and that attention to detail to other aspects in my life too, whether it's my other hobbies, has been really formative. So I think it's yeah, it's great. Fashion teaches you how to be specific.
Yeah. Again, in the same realm, what is the top fashion tip you would give the everyday man so he could look his best?
Hmm. I mean, learn, look at everything. Look at what you like, especially if it is vintage. Look at the vintage garment. What it is do you like about it? And look at what eras do you like? All that kind of informs the previous questions. All of that will come into play. And so developing that taste, getting that knowledge, um, is the best move. That's the best advice. Who do you want to look like? And what does that mean?
And last but not least, what does always be fly mean to you in the vintage sort of way?
It means when you're able to combine all the details that you like into a look that makes you happy, that's what it means to be fly. And when it's vintage, you have so many details to pick from. You have, you know, so many reference points. it makes it enhances the experience, you know? It's not just about looking appropriate, right? It's about executing that vision of what you wanted and what your taste is, and vintage is just the best way to do that. There's just so many details to pick from.
Ethan Wong, ride or die for vintage, because you're
That's
gonna
right.
die if you wear that Melton wool or that Harris tweed
That's
or
true.
that corduroy suit. Don't do it, Ethan. Just come back to New York. It's fall now.
That's
It's
true,
50
it's
something
true.
degrees. You know you love this place. You know you want to be here.
I'll be back. People know I can't tear myself away. It's been, once a year for 2 years, maybe sometime it'll be, 2 times a year. Who knows? What we do know is I will be back soon at some point. That's the
I'm
truth.
sure. I hope our paths cross. It was really fun for us, for me specifically to finally, meet you face to face, person to person. Thank you for taking those photos. That was really cool. I never put them on the gram, but it was just a nice personal recollection.
That's
And
what photographs are about, man. There's so many photos that I take that don't make it to Insta I know I post a lot, but there's still a lot that I keep
right,
for
of
myself,
course,
So,
of
yeah,
course, of course.
happy to
So
oblige.
no, no, absolutely. One day I'm gonna come out there, and when I come out there, it's gonna be a problem, LA. I'm just saying.
You're gonna have to make it to the Rose Bowl. That's what you gotta
I
do. You
would
gotta you gotta
listen. I like I said, I read about that thing, and it just seems so fascinating. And but man, I would really like to go there and not spend a dime, which I know will be impossible.
Yeah, I mean, but there's I always tell people, like, if you feel that, I mean, that's kind of empowering, right? You can every nothing matters. You can look at anything you want and you know that you're not buying it. You can try it on, you can
It is
experience it.
empowering when you have
That's
lived
the
a life like I have through fashion, and fortunate enough not to change overwhelmingly in size throughout the decades. Again, I have a prodigious wardrobe. So I like the self discipline of going through a place and not purchasing anything. I go, "Whew, wow, I'm really good. I steeled myself. This is amazing."
Absolutely. That's the best part, That's why I prefer going to the flea market with my friends because they'll buy it for me. I'm like, "That's so cool. You should buy this. Here you go." And then I'll see it when they wear it. I'm like, "Heck yeah, there you go. I got my jollies from it." I don't have to physically own it anymore. That's the whole thing.
Ethan Wong, vintage clothing soldier. Thank you for the time, man.
Thank you again, Reg.
Peace.